To consult or not to consult? That is the question. That was the opening line of a video I made in season 1 of MBA Monday. You may have recalled Alas Poor Yorick's brain was the subject of that opening line. Today I have with me Jackie Laine, Career Protocol's reigning career expert and recent project leader at the Boston Consulting Group. She came from a creative career before she became a management consultant after her MBA at Kellogg. So we thought we would just chat really briefly about both of our experiences transitioning from non-traditional industries into management consulting for all of you who are interested in getting into consulting post-MBA. Even if you're a normal, average, strong MBA applicant, hopefully we're gonna have some insights for you, but especially for those of you who are seeking to make a kind of a radical transition into consulting, Jackie and I are gonna spill the tea for you right now. Why don't we do alternating tips? Let's just play dueling tips. We'll get one tip from Jackie, one tip from me, and vice versa, and then we'll just see how long this is fun and see how it goes. So Jackie, I'm gonna let you go first because you were in consulting much more recently than me. So what's your number one tip for MBA students, MBA applicants on how to get into management consulting post-MBA?
It's just such a big question. And then there are so many questions like it's cousins that I want to answer also. It's fine. One tip. Okay, so coming as a non-traditional applicant, I was a reality TV producer. It's like you wouldn't imagine that there's not that much that transfers over, but there actually was quite a bit. So my tip number one is think about your skills and experiences broadly. I think people assume that consultants are just like analytical workhorses. And yes, we are, but my career at BCG actually kind of took an arc over to projects where I was working hand in hand with clients, solving their problems and getting them through implementing strategy and building programs. So the fact that I had a lot of cross-functional teamwork experience and stakeholder management and just like fun collaboration in tough environments from reality TV producing actually built the core of my BCG career. So you've got skills and experiences that are going to be valuable. You just have to think broadly about them and really understand what consulting firms are looking for to understand your match and how to market yourself, I guess, to consulting firms.
Brilliant. I'm actually going to build on that tip. I'm not going to go against it. I'm not going to counterpose it. I'm just going to build on that tip. And it's the last thing that Jackie said, which is learning how to market yourself to consulting firms. And we tend not to like to think of going through interviews and applying for jobs as a self-marketing exercise. But however you frame it, it's not only important to think about your experiences broadly and, as Jackie explained, understand the transferable skills that you have built in whatever career you've had thus far. It's really important to be able to tell stories about those experiences in the interview that really engender confidence in the people that you're speaking to. If you know anything about my own story, I only applied to 3 firms for summer internships, Bain, BCG, and McKinsey, and I got 0 offers. I spent the whole summer trying to get better at interviews. And what I figured out is that for me, the problem actually wasn't the case interview. It was the fit interview. I was not able to tell inspiring, compelling stories that made my interviewers feel comfortable that they could put me in front of a client right away and trust that I would create credibility and trust. And that, by the way, is all about how you communicate. So don't just focus on building a great resume and understanding your transferable skills. Really work hard to learn how to tell stories about those experiences so that when you're in the interview, they're really gonna believe in you and that you're ready to do that job. My book, Interview Hero, linked in the description, is kind of like the output of everything I learned on my own journey and then on my journey coaching hundreds of people to get jobs like this and to get into business school. So if you have any doubt that you are 100% ready to fully shine in an interview and showcase your readiness for consulting, check out that book. It's gonna be a huge help for you. Okay, that's my tip number 1. Let's go to tip number 2. Let's see what Jackie's tip number 2 is.
So I'm going to build off something Angela said, or at least explore something unsaid in what Angela said. I'm serious. So Angela mentioned what wasn't working for her was the fit part of her interviews. If you've already done a little digging into consulting recruiting, one, you're probably feeling very nervous. It's going to be okay. And two, you might have heard of this thing called the case interview. So consulting interviews consist of two parts. It's a fit behavioral, kind of your standard, like, tell me about yourself, tell me about a time when you blah, blah, blah. And then the second part is a case interview, where you're presented with a business problem, and on the spot with your interviewer, you try to figure out how to solve it using data that your interviewer provides to you throughout the case. It is a very specific interview format, very specific. It trips a lot of people up. For me, it was always a very sweaty experience. I felt like I was taking a math test in public naked. So my tip is about that. And you can kind of broadly apply it to your whole process as well. There are a lot of very fixed methods and approaches to the case interview, which work great for some people, which worked horribly for me when I was applying to business school. It took me until January. And if you know about recruiting timelines, consulting interviews start in mid-January. It took me until January to actually figure out how to do case interviews in a style that matched me, the way that my brain worked, the way that my personality is, the way that I relate to people. And so this tip is really about listening to as much conventional wisdom from as many places as possible, and then doing two things. Really checking with yourself if it works for you and makes sense for you. If it's not working for you, you can probably set it aside and find something else that does work. And then the second one is, while you're on this journey of figuring out what works best for you, whether it is or is not conventional wisdom, as you go through, you're going to meet people during recruiting. They might be students at school. They might be people who work at the firms. If you connect with someone, if they give you really good feedback that resonates with you, that helps you improve quickly, helps you understand, gives you a light bulb moment, really lean into those relationships. There's something about their approach that works for you. Maybe it's conventional, maybe it's not. But while you're following your heart to the best way to get through this process for you, lean into those wise mentors who give you that good advice that helps you out. There's two tips in one.
That was like 8 tips, but that's okay. We're not counting. But what I want to say is that just to like reframe some of what Jackie just said, like what you're effectively doing is telling them also how to be a good consultant. Because that's really what consulting is mostly about. It's about being an apprentice. This is why so many people choose consulting. It's not because the work is challenging and stimulating and reasonably well compensated. All of that's true. But the most valuable thing about management consulting, and why it's still the number one choice among a lot of MBA graduates, is because you'll be in an environment where you're apprenticed, where you're given the chance to try things and fail and to do it your own way and to go back to your manager and to get feedback and to grow and learn. It's like a cauldron of learning. It can be really uncomfortable at times, but I think in a lot of ways, it's still the best post-MBA learning opportunity, which brings me to my tip. That wasn't my tip. I was just talking about what Jackie said. My tip is, if you're watching this and you're still on your MBA application journey, and you plan to put consulting in your essays, you want to think about, what does consulting actually look like and what does it actually mean to you, which makes it your post-MBA career choice. So there's kind of a myth out there. There's two different myths. One is everyone says consulting, so I better not say consulting. And then there's another myth that says consulting is really easy. Consulting firms recruit a lot of people, so I should definitely say I want to go into consulting. None of this is true. The answer is consulting truly a great fit for you? And either the job that you want to have now, meaning, do you like solving problems in this way? Do you like working in teams? Do you like changing functions in industries every few weeks? Do you like the fact that you kind of come in and figure stuff out and not necessarily stick around to implement it? Is all of that okay with you in the job that you want? If so, then talk about why consulting is the job that you really want. And if you feel like all of that is interesting, but not really what you ultimately want in your career, then you might be going into consulting as a really great stepping stone to something else that's going to be much more meaningful to you. By the way, I think this is how most people think of consulting when they start. It's like, I'll do this for a while, then I'll move on to something that I'm more personally passionate about. Totally valid pathway, but if you're going to talk about it that way in your MBA applications, then you really need to talk about what consulting is. What are the skills it's going to give you? Why is it a good fit for you and your long-term plan, if not your short-term plan? So thinking about the whole application journey and how consulting might fit into it, it's really good to start thinking now about what that whole world actually looks like and how you're going to show the admissions committee that consulting is in fact the right next step for you, so that you're both inspiring and a credible candidate for consulting, which can be the tricky thing if you just name drop consulting and don't really put a lot of thought into it. Okay, let's do one more tip. Jackie, you got one more tip in you?
Maybe, but I have a reaction first. Should we start there? Okay. So when Angela mentioned really understanding what consulting is and the consulting skill set, and I mentioned like, think about your experiences broadly and how that could serve you in consulting. Maybe it's helpful to do like a 10-second like bleh about the consulting skill set. Okay, great. So when we talk about the consulting skill set, this is probably helpful to know. You're thinking automatically, you're a strategy consultant, you're doing a lot of quantitative analysis, you're doing financial modeling, hardcore Excel life. Yes, that is one part of the consulting toolkit, but let's talk about the rest. There's another aspect to data analysis and research that people don't generally think about, which is qualitative analysis. So doing expert interviews, getting voice of the consumer from consumer interviews, and marrying that with the quantitative data to have a full picture that really comes to life with statements from the employees that are going to be affected, from experts in the field, et cetera. So quantitative and qualitative research go together. And the real skill there is finding insight in data. So being able to analyze data, interpret it, and come up with conclusions and recommendations that make sense in real life. So that's one sort of set of skills. There's like a logic, there's an analytical, there's a problem solving, there's that stuff. There's also communication. You actually have to be able to communicate your recommendations and get people to buy into them. So this is the consultants make a lot of PowerPoint decks. So you're learning how to communicate written through PowerPoint, verbally through your meetings with clients and your interviews and all that good stuff. So there's analytical skills, there's communication skills, and then there's stakeholder management skills. So you're also going to have client relationships. You're going to want to be able to influence and persuade your clients. Those are important skills as well. And I think the last one is project management and just general self-efficacy. So can you put together a work plan? Can you deliver on deadline? That kind of thing. It's a really broad set of skills. And there's a good chance that the skills that you have really fit one of those dimensions very well. When you're applying to consulting school, when you're applying to consulting firms, there we go. That's a good area for you to highlight. When you're applying to business school, think about what of those other skill sets you want to build to be able to eventually reach your long-term goals or become the leader that you want to be.
This is tip number 6. My tip number 3, your focal point from the time you get into business school until the time interviews begin is getting an invitation to interview. Most people don't understand that how recruiting works on campus. I'll break it down for you really simply. Some firms come to campus, they court you, they talk to you, they provide their employees to network with you, they get to know you, and then they will create their closed list, as we call it, the invite list of people that they definitely want to interview for summer internships and eventually for full-time positions with their firms. If you're not on the closed list, you can still potentially bid for an interview and be able to interview with these firms. It kind of depends on how your school does it, and every school does it a bit differently. But your goal, hopefully it's really obvious, you want to be on that closed list. So the question is, how do you get on that closed list? Well, hidden in between all of the tips you've already heard today is the answer. The answer is you need to get to know the firms and build relationships with firm representatives, with the people who actually work there, the people who are doing recruiting, the people who are one day going to be your managers, because all recruiting decisions worldwide, almost at the professional level, still, those decisions are being made by human beings. And people want to work with the people that they like. So at BCG, we had this thing called the airport test, where it's like when you're talking to someone at a networking event, you're asking yourself, if I'm stranded at O'Hare waiting for a plane, while they're clearing snow from the runway for many hours, am I going to be happy to be stuck in the airport with this person or not? And whether you pass the whether you pass the airport test or not can make a huge difference in whether you get invited to interview or not. And of course, once you get invited to interview, you've got to tell great stories. You've got to master the case interview, just like Jackie said. But if you don't even get into that interview room, you've got no chance at all. So as you're going through the networking process, you really want to make sure to build genuine relationships with people that manage and run and recruit for these firms that you're interested in. My book below, How to Network Without Feeling Like an A-hole, will give you really good guidance on how to pass the airport test and build real relationships. I didn't mean for this to turn into a pitch for my 2 books, but it just so happens that both of my books were born through my own experience recruiting during business school for consulting firms, falling flat on my face, and then later succeeding, and then coaching my clients in all of the things that I learned. So if you want to dig deeper into any of the things that we talked about, we actually even have a top secret program to help you prepare for the case interviews, but that's like on the hush hush. We usually only make that available to clients. But if you want to tackle any of the things that we talked about today and advance your ability to be a successful candidate for management consulting jobs, please do check out the resources in the links below and be sure to implement the 6 tips that Jackie and I shared today, because I think I speak for Jackie when I say we're rooting for you. We loved our consulting experiences. We both decided consulting was not for us forever, but the time that we were there was incredibly meaningful, interesting, valuable, and formative for our entire professional outlook and skill set. Right, Jackie?
Very right. Very, very right, Angela.
I thought so. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you some other time, probably on a Monday. Good luck with consulting interviews. Good luck with your MBA applications. Good luck with those interviews. Go forth and conquer. And yeah, just stay awesome.
As you guys can probably tell, Angela and I could talk about consulting all day long, many days in a row. So many tips to share. We hope these were really helpful. Good luck out there and see you guys later.